This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for the Intentionality Gurus with Candace Pollock. Today's show, have you ever said yes when you really wanted to say no, or felt drained by the constant demands of work, relationships, or even your own expectations? Where do you tolerate too much, hold back too soon, or are fear of going too far? What are the invisible edges between yes and no, your boundaries and margins where you either expand or unconsciously self-limit? Again, welcome to the Intentionality Gurus Podcast, where Candace Pollock explores the science and art of turning your untapped potential into strategic impact. Today's episode is Boundaries, Margins, and Self-Command. Where do we expand or self-limit? Today, we're diving into how boundaries and margins shape our choices, our personal power, and ultimately our ability to live with greater personal and professional freedoms, focus, and fulfillment. So what I'm going to say to you, Candace, I need this podcast desperately.
And tell me why, if you don't mind.
Um,
In what way? In what way, I should say.
Yeah, I need to reset boundaries. I was doing a really good job at doing that for a while. And in the last, probably 6 months, I've let everybody else come into the circle when I'm not prepared. And so I feel myself saying yes because people are there, but I really want to say no and haven't found that voice.
So let me take the spotlight, let's say like on a stage or something, and put it on that point where what are you feeling before you say yes? What are you feeling when you know you wanted to say no? Where does it tend to show up in the sequence of events?
Um, it feels like things are creeping in. Like I think I have these boundaries, and then all of a sudden I just notice it. All of a sudden, I'm starting to feel stifled because others have expectations of me. And so I start withdrawing, but I don't voice it, if that makes any sense. Like somebody's asking me to do something, I don't say yes, I don't say no. Um, I feel compelled that I've got to do it, but I don't do it with enthusiasm or um, I'm just doing it because I feel like I have to.
Yeah, it's a perfect expression of what a lot of us feel. And regardless of how assertive or passive or, any of that stuff, it's not so much that we'll be focusing on today in terms of the passive or aggressive or assertive. So the idea is we have adapted as young children to the dynamics that are swirling around us when we were at our tiniest and probably least confident about what we're capable of in terms of the big people around us. So when I say, where does it show up in your body? When do you first detect that? At what point?
Oh, almost immediately. I feel like my whole body is going tense. It's like I want to push things away, and yet I feel that it's just keeps coming closer and closer to me.
And so the coming closer and closer is it catches you off guard, or what is it?
Um, it doesn't catch me off guard because I sort of have this expectation that this is going to happen, but I'm not. I keep putting up a wall, hoping that it will bounce off of me, but instead
Mhm.
it like penetrates through me. And so I feel tense. I feel anger. Um, I feel compromised. It just, and I don't know how to get out of it. And so I just let it happen. And then afterwards, um, I'm angry at myself for letting it happen.
And do you ever get annoyed with the other person or the circumstances?
So it depends on the person. Um, and the answer would be yes. I have more tolerance for people that I'm not real close to than I do to the ones who I'm very close to.
And so the people that you're close to, is there some sense that they should know better or they should be able to understand what they're asking of you?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And that the rebound that I get from that is typically, well, you haven't told me, or um, if you would have asked for something, you know, I would have done it. And it's like, it's still putting me, it's still making me expand my boundaries because now I got to explain everything.
Yeah, and my personal experience with it is, particularly as a younger person, when they would say, well, you should have just told me. And if I had just told them, they would talk me out of tell me all the reasons why I shouldn't want that thing
Yeah,
or be afraid of that thing.
right.
And so, even as a little kid, it was kind of like smacking my forehead, like in that Woody Allen movie, where the kid gives somebody else in the class gives a dumb answer. It's like, duh, like I'm a kid,
Yeah.
I'm not expected to know these things. So in this context, what does boundaries mean to you?
For me, boundaries mean that I'm allowed to walk away from situations, not let other people dictate their needs over mine. Um, and in reverse, the boundaries is that if I'm going to help somebody else out, um, I need to feel confident that they want my help. So I'm not going to just go do something for somebody if I think it's going to, if I'm stepping, on their toes.
Mhm. And how do you tend to be able to delineate which side of the line you're on at any given time?
Um, I try to communicate it as best as I can, especially when it's, to help somebody else out. I may ask this, the easy question, is there anything that I can do for you? Is there any assistance that you might need? Um, that way I hear, no, I've got it taken care of. I don't need your help, or yes, this is what I need. And then I can make that choice. Do I do that or not? However, when people are coming to me with their needs, I've gone back to where I had been most of my life. And that is, you know, oh darn, I have to stop what I'm doing because I got to help you. And I'm not doing it with any kind of pleasure. And that takes a lot of energy.
So it's more of an obligation feeling to it than
Right.
a true desire to jump in and help.
Right.
So boundaries is that, line between, what we want to do and what we don't want to do. And it doesn't always show up. Sometimes it can have to do with the timing, the scope of it. You might say, oh, I'll be happy to give you a ride to the airport, but you didn't really opt in to wait an hour and help them with their luggage, or
Right.
they hadn't finished packing, or all of those things. And I certainly have had friends like that I, I didn't sign up. I didn't see the fine print that said I needed to do all of these things. And the same thing with clients in my day job, that we call some of it pro bono work. That's the voluntary part. And
Yep.
then there's the involuntary pro bono that we didn't sign up for. And it's difficult to say no to people, especially if you have the skills to do it, and theoretically the time frame and so on. So you can be thinking of your boundaries as your personal rules of engagement. And it can be as much with yourself, your commitments to yourself, for health and other things, as well as for other people. So when I say your rules of engagement, what shows up for you, if anything?
My rules of engagement.
Yeah, your personal rules of
Yeah.
engagement.
So if I could go back to where I was about 6 months ago, and I know I can, but it's going to take time. Um, my rules are more about if it doesn't truly fit my needs and somebody else can help that person, then, I had the ability to communicate that better than I do now. So I wasn't letting people just, step over the line and say, okay, I'm here and, I need you to do this for me, and then me just doing it. Whereas about 6 months ago, when I was really cultivating my boundaries, if somebody would have stepped over the line, if it's something I truly did not want to engage in, I could find the dialogue to have with them, not to engage, not to let them interrupt my life.
So without forcing you to, share more than you want to share, trying to be mindful of your
Yeah.
boundaries on that, what changed? What made that grasp on that slip a bit?
I don't truly know other than um, I had one coaching client who I took on back in May. And if anybody out there understands coaching, a coach does not tell you what to do and how to do it. As a coach, we try to find out what it is that you want to do and find the best possible method for you to, do that. And every time we had a session, she would start off with, tell me what to do. Tell me how I should do this. You know, tell me, that you're willing to talk to either my husband or my best friend so that you can explain what I'm going through. And I kept telling her, this is not what I do. This is not what I do. And she would say, okay, explain to me what coaching is again. And I would tell her. But I think I got so wound up in that dialogue that I started letting my own guard down. And other people, whether it be family or very close friends, they would just maybe come and say, you know, how do I do my grocery shopping when I'm, working 80 hours a week? And my response would be, oh, can I help you? Because you walked over my boundary and now I'm willing to help you, but I really don't want to do this.
Mhm, mhm. So what have you done to protect yourself from you?
Um, I haven't,
Because that's really what it's about, right? It's
right.
really us. It's
Yes,
it's not really coming from the outside.
right. Um, Recently I haven't done anything. Um, I sort of used my shoulder injury as a good um, excuse not to do certain things. Um, However,
I'm
and
sure your doctor would have appreciated that though. And anyway,
yeah,
like
well,
reaching to the top of a shelf, you should not be doing that anyway.
exactly. And it worked until all of a sudden, certain people now see that, wow, you can do that. Okay. And even though it may be painful or maybe I'm overextending myself, they don't see that. And I have not been open enough to share with them, hey, I'm going to have to start asking either for help or saying no to when you need my help.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a couple of things that occurred to me. I remember years and years ago, somebody shared with me, it's easier said than done, but shared with me, if it's not a complete yes, it's a no. And I think I shared on this program a long time ago that my older sister really, who's no longer with us, but was really drop dead gorgeous. In fact, they were doing a movie in our area when we were in high school, and they had a Hollywood director and others there, and they wanted to send her out to Hollywood for a screen test. And because she was just a junior in college, they wouldn't let her, my parents wouldn't let her go. But anyway, the long and short of it is, guys were always like flopping around, wanting to call her and so on. And then she would make me screen, you hear that phrasing? She would make me screen her calls and tell them she wasn't available. And then one time a neighbor boy showed up at the house and he wanted to talk to her. And we saw him coming up the walk. And my sister said, "Tell him I'm not here. I'm telling him I'm not here." And somehow it went on to, he saw her, I guess, in the house. I can't remember all the details. But she continued to talk to him and she was flirting with him and everything. And so here I am, like in my tweens. And after he left, I got angry with her and I said, if you want to say no like you mean it, not like you can be convinced to say yes, because it's making more work for me.
Right, exactly.
And then
Yeah.
I'm being made out to be the liar and so on. I didn't know that was a boundary thing at the time. I just, this is what you have to do when your older, bigger sister could threaten you with physical harm if you didn't do what she said you to do. But it shows up in so many subtle things. And your example reminded me of something I had just Friday. So I was coaching a team and in an office team, not a baseball or anything.
Yeah.
And they were in a car for some peculiar reason, and only one person was driving, I will say that. And then at the very end, they said, "Did you take notes?" Meaning to me, and I take copious notes. And they said, "Could you send them to us? Because we didn't take notes." And I didn't say anything at the time. I didn't even have a reaction at the time. But later, I started to like look at my notes, realizing how illegible they were. I can understand them, but nobody else would. And I thought, hell no.
Yeah.
You have to be invested to take your own notes. What is that slip slidey line there where was I enabling him? And now my husband was a psychiatrist and he was constantly trying to remind me about boundaries. I knew about them, but not as well as he did, obviously. But the idea is we can just pay attention to that little early warning system in our body because it's telling us something, any kind of tension along those lines. We can remember that if it isn't a complete yes, it's a no. And we don't have to say no immediately. We can sit with it and say, I'm going to have to think about that. We can buy ourselves times and we can have some stock phrases that we're ready with. Another phrase that he gave me, not intentionally, it was just coincidentally, but there was something or other where I needed to refuse somebody something. And he said, "It can't be helped." And, that was like a magic wand, like it just broke the spell on me. And so I've used that. It can't be helped, and it's otherwise I know myself enough. I'm a kind person. I'm a generous person as a rule. But I can do it to my own detriment. All right.
Like
So
I
thoughts
used,
there.
yeah, I used one of your, um, I guess I'll call it a quote last night with my son. Um, he was repeating the same thing for like probably the fifth time yesterday. And I just said, "I'm out of cope. I'll talk to you tomorrow."
Yeah, that also came from my husband. Yes.
Did it? And
Yeah.
and as soon as I said it, he goes, "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. I did it again, didn't I?" And I just said, "I'll talk to you tomorrow." Now, obviously, I did create a boundary over that, and I now realize I did. But, you know, typically I just let him talk and talk and talk
Mhm, mhm.
and it just got to me. It was like 9 o'clock at night. I don't even know what I was watching on TV, but I was watching something and I just wanted to relax.
Mhm.
after hearing this conversation, when I said it, I was surprised that he picked up on it.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't use it very often because sometimes I feel like I'm mimicking you by using saying it. But that's exactly how I felt yesterday. And yeah, it worked. But the question is, you know, am I at that point where I'm really ready to um, be more vocal in a nice way when I don't want to do something?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I wanted to explore in this conversation today, that, we can be on the hunt for the boundaries. It doesn't mean we have to be asserting them all the time with a whistle and, a badge or like a sidewalk crossing guard or something. We can just notice that, oops, maybe there's something there that merits a little more scrutiny. And that's what happened to me when I was thinking about, rewriting my notes so that people could read them, because they hadn't had the foresight to show up and take notes themselves. I have other people I coach that take copious notes. And they basically say, wait, I have got my paper and my pen handy here. Okay, and it's for their purpose. It's not like I'm coming up with words of wisdom necessarily.
Right.
It's their insights that the conversation is invoking. So the idea is we can go on a hunt for boundaries where we may be overstepping others. I recognize that episode where they wanted me to give them the notes was me in some levels maybe infantilizing them by doing it. So it isn't just that they're making me quote unquote do something that they should be doing. And I know all of these words are trigger words,
Right.
but just being aware of, okay, there's a little boundary here, and I may come back to that and look at it more closely. So then the other word in the title is margins. So what do you think margins are?
Um, so people can maybe sort of cross over that boundary line, um, but you don't let them get too close.
That can be it. Definitely. And then the other part is more or less under the heading of how far can you go? All right. So often when I take programs, it's like a survey course like we had in college or something. It's a broad scope, but maybe not as deeply detailed on some of the component pieces in the whatever the topic is. But I really like to, so right now I'm really exploring boundaries. And then it occurred to me, well then, but I'm also getting into what are the outer limits of this topic, and how does it show up? It shows up with our promises to ourselves. We're breaking our commitment to ourselves in terms of health habits and those kinds of things. So, margins basically are the space around all those boundary rules, and where we tolerate, where we can expand, where we need to like scale back, contract a bit, and we're basically where we unintentionally self-limit. All right. And I'm acutely aware of those. I've been keeping a little inventory of where unintentionally and intentionally self-limit, because of, all sorts of ways I've learned to cope, generally as a kid and otherwise. But then how these boundaries and margins and these limits or expansion inform our life, our ability to experience life uniquely, not exactly the same as anybody else necessarily, and fully, because that's where our full potential comes in, where we're underutilizing what's available and open to us. We're really so fortunate looking at all the things that are happening in the world. We're so fortunate in terms of how much we have available, and then, sitting and vegging out in front of the television or something like that, is that utilizing it? I mean, it's not a judgment. It's a choice. It's a fork in
Right.
the road. So what shows up for you talking about margins
It's interesting, and never thought of this before, but um, I used to set boundaries between my mother and I, because my mother would just like nitpick. Um, and that was her way of communicating, which I now understand. Didn't understand it back then. But I would say to myself, I'm not going to let her get any farther than this, whatever this was. And then I let her just keep creeping closer and closer. When I would finally get off the phone talking to her, I was angry and I took everything so personally. And then I would have to take a couple of days to cool myself down and say, okay, I'll call, I miss her. I want to talk to her. And again, in my mind, I would set boundaries. I'm not going to let certain things affect me. I'm not going to let her go in that direction. But I did over and over again. Um, and it really wasn't until she passed away that I sat down and thought about it. And it was like I I allowed her to keep getting closer because I was waiting for that magic word or magic phrase that she was going to say, but I wasn't hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think I do that with other people. I don't know exactly who, but I feel like I sometimes do that too. It's like, well, I'm going to set this boundary. Okay, well, you can come a little closer. Oh, no, you can't. And then I keep letting them keep creeping up until either I'm unhappy or I use the words like I did with my son yesterday, I'm out of cope. Um,
And
just
which one makes you feel better?
um, using the term I'm out of cope made me feel so much better because it was
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't have to go any further.
Yeah, you don't have to justify it. You don't have to explain it. It's, for whatever reason, maybe you were sitting on a block of ice or something and just, like ran out of coke. I don't know where
Yep.
that concept came from, but there's no explanation from it. And that goes back to my older sister and the guys, falling all over her. My mother taught us that if we were to decline an invitation, just to say, no, I won't be able to make it and not explain why. Because if you're just making an excuse to get out of something and they find out later that you didn't do that excuse because one, you didn't remember or whatever, then you just say, I'm sorry, I have other plans. That's the safest way to be. And you don't have to explain because people will talk you out of it. Oh, well, no, we'll pick you up. Oh, no, when you didn't really want to go at all, kind of a deal. So, the thing for me is this, I started out looking at boundaries as like as a remedy, all right? And then I realized, oh my God, this is an opportunity. And that's where the margins came in. Like how far, what am I willing to tolerate? What am I not willing to tolerate? My values and so on. I was watching something or reading something and they were talking about animal cruelty. And some people were watching a dog being beaten. I don't know I can't remember what it was. And they weren't doing anything. And I thought, well, that's not my value. I would have had to step in and do something. Now, maybe that's a boundaries issue and so on. I would hope so. All right. Because it's just cruelty for cruelty's sake. But the point is, we can really get to know ourselves better and then step into our full power and potential. So it became more exciting. And the idea is developing that healthy element of self-command. So we're not reactive because of past ways we've learned how to cope just to keep the peace or to, not be bothered with things and so on. So going forward in this week, what do you predict might be a trigger for you where this might come in handy?
Um, so I have a really extensive week, my first really extensive week since my injury. Um, and so I I decided even before this podcast that I have to make sure that I'm taking time in between everything that I have to do to decompress, because otherwise I'll be out of cope before I even get started in the day. Um, and I basically, in my mind, and I think I'm going to write it down to help me. is sort of identify how important each of these events that I have scheduled are, so that if I'm not able to cope, to rearrange them. And there's a couple that I can, and I know there's a couple that I can't. And so I need to be, I have to set my own boundaries of saying, when I get to here, if I'm not prepared, I may have to reschedule something,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
be okay with rescheduling it rather than beating myself up. And that's going to be the hard part this week, because I really want to get back in full swing. But after I looked at even my calendar yesterday for this week, it was like, what was I thinking?
Yeah, I've had weeks like that, like
Yeah.
where I've been in that predicament where it's overwhelming, and I say, God, please help me get through this week. I promise I'll never do this again. And then it clears out, and then of course I do it again.
Yeah.
So just, anchoring back to the boundaries, what are they, and why they matter? There's healthy boundaries and unhealthy boundaries. I think we have people in our lives that everything is a burden. They can't do anything, maybe it's acquired helplessness and so on. And I don't want to be judgmental, but I think there are some people that have unhealthy boundaries. And I have a friend who I don't think I've ever known her to date anybody who isn't married. And it's just such a phenomenon. It breaks my heart to observe that. And then some other people who have overly rigid boundaries. I had somebody who, if you called after 8 p.m., even in the summer, the person would say, "Don't call me after 8," and hang up. It's like, okay, I'll remember that. But I really needed to tell you, your house is on fire or something. And then the porous boundaries. And I think of my friend with the relationships with people who are married. Like, what is it about it that this person is a lovely, lovely person, obviously doesn't see herself in that way. And then just the ways that we self-sabotage in terms of people pleasing and over giving and or avoiding. Those are the three main ways of kind of handing over the reins to somebody else, and all those hidden iceberg of things that keep us from maybe it's fear of rejection or guilt or just the need for approval, like good job there, Karen or Candy. So how far do you think you'll let yourself go before you pull back?
Um, it's a good question. We'll probably figure that out, and in 2 weeks we'll talk about it. But I think I'm more prepared now to um, pull back on the areas where um, it's not going to be beneficial to allow those things to come over the boundary line. Um, and I really do think I'm going to make that list after this podcast, so that I have something to focus on. And, if everything goes right, and I got cope, and I'm not allowing things to cross over that I don't want to cross over, maybe I'll get everything done that I have on my calendar, or maybe I will do some rescheduling.
And be okay with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. So it'll be fun just to play, little citizen scientist on yourself and notice where they are. And oops, okay, I didn't see that one coming. I stepped over it a little bit, but I was able to step back. And I mean, that's the fun part, just to
That is.
be curious.
So as we conclude today's podcast, the question to all of our listeners is, so where are you in your life? Do you need stronger boundaries? Where are you unconsciously limiting yourself, playing small, avoiding discomfort, or tolerating things that drain you? Don't follow what I've been doing, because that will probably drain you. Where do you
Especially
need
the
to draw?
shoulder injury.
Yep. Where do you need to draw the line? Where might you expand? And what's possible if you intentionally choose rather than fell back onto your default responses? So, if today's conversation sparked something in you, because it certainly did in me, if you recognize patterns that aren't serving you and you're ready to explore ideas like these more deeply, stay tuned for Intentionality Gurus' upcoming self-sabotage to self-command boot camp later this quarter. Please sign me up. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with someone you know who might need a little extra inspiration, leave a review. But until next time, be intentional. Have a great day,
Take care.
Candace. Bye-bye now.
Bye.